Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity One-on-One with Larry and Joe.
Hey, Larry, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm just studying now again to get ready. I got to take my CEH class over again. So kind of studying, getting ready for that in January.
I have a very interesting topic that I thought you might be interested in learning about, and I think our listeners might be interested in learning about. So I'm pretty excited for this discussion.
All right.
So we're going to be talking about DDoS, so distributed denial of service. And we have a special guest that I'd like to introduce you to. And so really to help our listeners better understand this topic, we've invited Pankaj Gupta from Citrix. Pankaj, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, so Pankaj, would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit and your background, just so our listeners know a little bit about you, and then we'll talk more about DDoS and why we're still talking about DDoS in the year 2021. Can you believe it?
Thank you, Joe. I'm Pankaj Gupta. I'm responsible for product marketing at Citrix. Citrix help companies to protect their most valuable assets, which is their infrastructure, hybrid workforce, and intellectual property and the data. And I run the product marketing here. Before that, I was at Cisco, ran the marketing function. And I am super excited and very committed helping our larger SecOps community to learn about security threats and how to mitigate them.
All right. Well, we're honored to have you on the show, with the background at these really top class companies, Cisco and Citrix. I'm sure you have a lot of experience to share with our listeners. A lot of our listeners may not have heard about this milestone. I just heard it the other day. Recently, just a few weeks ago, we just reached, I think, was it the 25th anniversary of the first DDoS attack? Is that right, Pankaj?
Absolutely, Joe. The first denial of service attack happened on September 6th on 1996 to New York's oldest commercial internet provider, Panix. And that brought their system down.
Wow.
It is not just a coincidence. Approximately same 25 years later, in the same month, a internet giant called Yandex, based out of Russia, had the largest volumetric distributed denial of service DDoS attack in the history of internet.
Wow. So to give our listeners a little perspective, what is a DDoS attack? And then I'd love to really kind of get into, a lot of various questions. What are the motivations or the people behind these things? What are they trying to achieve? But let's just talk about, what is DDoS? What does it really mean?
Sure. So DDoS, in a very basic, simple terms, is an attack which aims to overload or exhaust a business's digital resources and preventing them from performing normally.
Okay.
It could be a router, it could be a server, it could be any part of infrastructure which sees a huge influx of the traffic coming to that, making that web server or a specific network device to crash. The DDoS attacks can also be a smoke screen to data breaches.
I see. Okay.
Or it can also be, now a new word, can be used for ransom DDoS attacks.
I see.
So they have evolved multiple dimensions, but the DDoS attack, the three basic mechanisms behind it is a connection protocol attack, on which they fill all the connection tables of edge devices like routers, firewalls, load balancers.
Okay.
Second one could be volumetric attack. So they try to attempt to attack a network directly and fill the pipes with very legitimate looking requests, like ICMP floods, ICMP fragmentation, IPsec floods. And the third kind of attack could be the application layer attack. So you are attacking the application so they can't perform. So your e-commerce website can go down, your web server can go down. So various things can
Interesting. Happen. Interesting. So, I just thought of something like a Coinminer might actually effectively contribute to a DDoS if the CPU on a web server is overwhelmed because it's doing coin mining. That's an indirect DDoS attack because it's not really necessarily like network based, but it might have actually the same effect, right?
Yes, the objective is very similar, to bring a digital resources down. Many times they attack the control plane, sometimes they attack the data plane, but you talked about the motivations behind it.
Before we get into motivations, I would love your opinion on this. Why do you think we're still talking about DDoS 25 years later? Why is it still a problem? Why do you think it hasn't been solved yet?
Excellent question. Excellent question. In last 25 years, we have found cure for many diseases. But in last 25 years, DDoS attacks have become more frequent and much bigger, much voluminous, and more dangerous. The reason behind is that these DDoS attacks have become much simpler to orchestrate by bad actors.
Okay, so the simplicity is one of the factors that's leading to the higher frequency, the damage that these are causing. That really helps. So Larry, in your studies, right, you're getting into cybersecurity. So many of our listeners, right, we have hundreds of thousands of listeners worldwide. They're also trying to get into cybersecurity. So this could be the first time they're kind of hearing of DDoS. Larry, do you have any specific questions on, DDoS, especially with what you've been learning, in all the certification training and everything?
Yeah. So the denial services. I wondered, how can someone ransom off just denial services?
Okay. So ransom is a new emerging trade. And what happens in the ransom, normally the bad actors will send you a note that we are going to do a DDoS attack on you. Many times they also do a small DDoS attack on you to give you a legitimacy that we are capable of that. And then it is a very tough decision for the enterprise to pay ransom or not to pay the ransom. And typically they ask, normally, not a very huge amount, a small amount. So the businesses have a tough decision that if I don't pay and if I get attacked, then my business get disrupted. Mm-hmm. If I pay, then my business continue, but it can be also a hoax. The third issue which they run into that, they think that this much money is asked, but if attack happens, the cost of attack and of the disruption and to get things right after the attack, what is the total cost associated with that?
I see.
So this is the ransom attack. And this is a fundamental change we have seen in economic model in the last 25 years. Previously, attacks were about getting a fame, getting the bragging rights, or hacktivism, or activism. Now this new model is all about economic benefits associated with that. So now what has happened with the DDoS attack, most of the humans strive for money and fame, and DDoS attack gives that both to a bad actor. That's the reason we are seeing more and more DDoS attack, and getting them bigger and bigger.
I'm just curious, how much do you guys think it costs for somebody to cause a DDoS attack? Like, can you just go to the dark web and rent a DDoS attack to target a company? And what kind of costs are we talking about here for like a DDoS as a service type attack?
Yes, so DDoS have become much simpler. And DDoS are typically, DDoS attacks are normally orchestrated on the compromise bot devices and the bot networks. And if you are a high school kid, even a high school kid, and you have access to darknet, you can hire these bot networks to orchestrate that attack on certain organization.
I've seen,
simple.
I've seen some of these kids. I've seen the headlines where they'll actually take out their school because they have a test the next day. So Larry, they'll be like, "Hey, I'm going to take out my school's network." And hey, if you're a kid listening to this, that's a bad decision. Do not do that. You will. There are consequences. Believe me. You might get away with it once, possibly. But if usually what happens is criminals, when they do things over a pattern, that's when they get caught. Anyway, don't do that if you're listening at home. But you're right. A high school kid that gets access to, say, the Tor web browser, right? They get access to the darknet. They pay in cryptocurrency, so kind of relatively untraceable, right? Still can be traced, but relatively untraceable. And they could basically take out their school, so they don't have to test the next day. Now that's kind of in a simplest, scenario. But you mentioned like the ransomware scenario. I mean, we're talking about very, very life-altering consequences if a hospital gets hit and they can't transmit because their bandwidth has been fully consumed. And so now they can't call out to a helicopter to pick someone up. And we're really talking about pretty serious things. And what's really concerned me, Pankaj, I don't know if you've observed this, but it seems like there's been a shift in morality that's occurred over the last 20 years. It seemed like people weren't really targeting hospitals and places like that. But now it kind of seems like anything's fair game and they don't really care. They don't really care who they're hurting. Hospitals are actually one of the most targeted groups. I'm sure you probably have stats on that. Healthcare. And it does seem to be like there has been a moral shift in over 20 years.
No, you are absolutely right, Joe. The economic gain is a much stronger motivation for ransom DDoS attacks. And cryptocurrency also makes it much easier to make a payment, which could be very hard to trace.
Right.
And orchestrating attack, we already talked about, it has become so simple for them. There is one more dimension of attacks. There are laws across the world about criminalization of DDoS attack. Like the federal law, 500,000 penalty and few years of jail.
Okay.
But very few bad actors get prosecuted. Just in a stat, in 2020, there were 10 million DDoS attacks globally. And less than 10 people got convicted for that. So if there is a bad actor,
wow,
it is easier to orchestrate the attack. There is an economic model behind it to make the money. Being caught and prosecuted, chances are much low. So for a bad actor, it looks like a low-hanging fruit to make good money. And as I said, most of the people are motivated by money and fame. And DDoS attack gives both to a bad actor.
So Pankaj, do you think it's easier for companies just to pay that ransom than just trying to prosecute these guys or finding these guys? So companies probably find it easier just to pay whatever, because it's maybe not, like you said, it's probably not a large amount.
Paying ransom is never a right option for any organization, because it signals to the bad actors that they can do this again and again. The right strategy for any organization is to build a very strong DDoS protection offering, implement a DDoS protection strategy and implement it. And there are multiple solutions in the marketplace, including from Citrix to implement DDoS protection solutions. One thing which has also changed is that, because if you fight a war for a very long time, it becomes a part of life. And that is what has happened with DDoS, because IT has fought that war for 25 years and it's still going on. So it became from strategic to tactical. But CISOs, the IT organization, the SECOPS, still have to look at their DDoS defense mechanisms and see that do they have the right solution for that.
So I've got a very interesting question for you. If you're a CFO and you're thinking about spending, let's say, $1 million in DDoS prevention, I would wonder, does the CFO have any tools or abilities to easily determine the cost of downtime so that they can kind of weigh, is this preventative measure going to actually be less expensive than the amount of losses that I could incur if I don't protect against this, right? Is there any tools or any assets available to organizations so that they can quantify this?
So there are many pieces which are quantifiable, and most important ones are not. So if you just do a Google search and see that what is the average cost of the DDoS attack, you will find those numbers running into tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending what kind of business you are. But there is a much bigger cost to it. The trust of the customer you may lose. The reputation you may get to lose. And I'm sure that many of the ransom attacks which you have seen recently, and some of them were paid, they made a lot of headline in the newspapers. And you can't put a dollar amount on the reputation of your digital business.
Great points. No, fantastic points. Do you think for organizations that choose not to invest in DDoS prevention technology, is the problem going away anytime soon on its own, or do you think the increased bandwidth from 5G or the proliferation of these IoT devices doubling over the next 3 years, do you think the problem is going to get worse before it gets better for these organizations that choose not to invest in technology?
You are absolutely right, Joe. There are three fundamental trends which are going to make these attacks much bigger, more frequent, and more economically damaging. Number one, the 5G networks. That gives a bigger speed or bigger connection. So that means attacks can become bigger.
More packets, more bandwidth, you're right. So it's going to get worse, actually. Yep.
The second one is exponential growth of IoT devices. In 2021, there were 46 billion IoT devices were expected.
Can we pause there for a second? I think some of our audience may not know about IoT. So Larry, are you familiar with IoT? Like what does IoT mean? Just to break that down, I want to make sure everyone's pretty clear on this.
Okay.
I don't know. And I know I learned it in school, but I don't remember.
So I think there's a lot of people listening to this, Pankaj, that are like, what is IoT? I've never heard that before. What is IoT?
So IoT is Internet of Things. And I'm sure each of your listeners has an IoT device. It could be a camera in their home, which is connected to internet. It could be a security alarm. It could be a home router. And many of these IoT devices have a lot of security vulnerabilities. And bad actors can get inside them and make them to join their bot networks. So as the number of IoT devices increases exponentially, these bot networks can becoming bigger and bigger.
So basically what you're saying is if I go and buy a Nanny Cam, I'm basically adding an additional device to the internet, and then that device, because of its weak default security, could be taken over by a hacker and used not just to spy in a creepy way on the family, but basically it can be used to basically flood packets using my gigabit, fiber optic. And I am now basically attacking a company I don't even know about, but they're basically using my devices like a zombie network, essentially, to attack some target. And so basically everybody's home could be used together with enough of these devices to basically take down any website that the attacker wants. That's quite a bit of power at the fingertips of even just a high school kid who can log into the dark web. This is frightening, Pankaj, that this is happening.
And there are two more dimensions to it. The next dimension is the compute power is increasing. Every device which you buy today, and you buy after a year, that has a much bigger CPU power.
And that means more packets, right? That means they can
Yes.
actually just spit out more packets. So the bigger bandwidth, the more packets, this problem is actually going to get significantly worse, right? So I think at this point, we've probably defined the problem quite well. I would love to know, I'd like to kind of get into some of the solutions that exist. And I have a couple of, I'd love to maybe just share with you and Larry, Pankaj, if you don't mind, how I've been solving it. And then I'd like you to maybe fill in some gaps and tell me what I'm missing. So in 2019, one of my clients came to me and they were actually getting hit really hard by a DDoS attack. And they said, hey, can you help? I didn't really have a solution, so I started researching it. And I think the first search result I got was CloudFlare. So I needed to get a little bit of experience before I could really rep it. So I actually put my company on it. And I think at the time I was paying maybe $30 a month or something for my website to be protected, by it. Basic DDoS protection. Now that's just a small business website. We're not talking about like the large corporate enterprise costs, here. But that was the one that I gained experience on. It was pretty easy to set up. And essentially the way it worked, and this is really for Larry's benefit and the listeners' benefits, is I uploaded my DNS zone file to Cloudflare, and then I made my DNS registrar make Cloudflare my authoritative DNS source, which means anybody on the internet trying to query my website would have to ask Cloudflare for the answer. And the answer that came back was, here's the Cloudflare network. Now, behind the Cloudflare network was my resources, but they would basically absorb the brunt of any kind of attack because the DNS resolved to it. Now there's some inherent weaknesses. If the attackers through like OSINT, like open source intelligence means, somehow found my direct IP address, then they could attack my network equipment directly and bypass the DNS layer. But effectively, my whole familiarity primarily with DDoS protection is really like a DNS solution like Cloudflare. I know Microsoft has some new stuff as well, but fill in the gaps for me. What am I missing? Why would a company like me or anyone else really need something more? Or how do your solutions maybe compare? I would love to personally learn about that. I think our audience might like to learn about that too.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And we worked with many Citrix customers to advise them to choose the right DDoS solution. And Citrix offers a variety of DDoS protection solutions to our customers. There are four key criteria any enterprise has to look at when they choose a DDoS protection. The first is, and most important one, is the comprehensive protection against various types of DDoS attacks. You never know, is this attack is going to be on a connection protocol, or will it be a volumetric attack, or it will be an application layer attack? And under each one of these categories, there are so many types of attacks. So you want to have a very comprehensive protection mechanism which helps you to protect against variety of the attacks. You never know which kind of attack is going to come. So that is the first part. The second, and by the way, Citrix solution offers a very comprehensive protection against variety of the DDoS attack. The second one is more and more critical, the volume. Is it scalable to mitigate the biggest DDoS attacks? Because DDoS attacks are increasing in size 20% year over year almost. So you should have a solution that can scale when the biggest DDoS attack hits you. And you never know what big attack is going to hit you. So
got it. Okay.
And that's where it comes into play, that do I have a DDoS protection solution on premise, or do I use it in the cloud? The
Got it. Okay.
advantage of having a cloud-based DDoS protection, that it can auto scale as the
That's right.
attack sizes increases.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense, because if you put your DDoS protection on your on premise, all the attacker has to do is basically flood the amount of available bandwidth that your ISP has to your site, and it doesn't matter what kind of equipment you have; they've taken up all your bandwidth, right? So that auto scale in the cloud makes a ton of sense. Now,
Yeah.
I do have a question. So, there's very few global data center providers out there, right? You've got Google, Amazon, Microsoft. You might have Akamai and a few others. Have you guys actually built your own unique data centers to host this, or do you guys use a different provider? And the reason I ask is because I think Google had a major outage a couple of days ago, and there were significant websites affected by this because there was a supply chain dependency. Do you guys have any of those exposures, or have you built out a unique kind of all-in-one, like your own solution? I'm primarily referring to the cloud solution here.
Sure. So Citrix does offer a cloud-based auto-scale DDoS protection solution. We have POPs across the globe, and they have more than 12 terabit of scrubbing capacity all across the globe. So having a more number of POPs or having a DDoS scrubbing facility closer to your user or your data center gives you a better performance and lower latency for you. So Citrix has invested to build a large scale POP infrastructure for these DDoS protection service for our customers.
So you mentioned one of your POPs can handle 12 terabits, and that's pretty significant, because I think earlier you mentioned one of the largest ones ever recorded was only just a couple terabits, right?
Yeah, I think the largest is close to 3 terabit at this moment, and we expect next year it's going to exceed.
Yeah.
And what I talked about, the capacity, that is the global capacity together for that. Because that's the beauty of distributed attack, because attack comes from different variety of bots spread all across the globe.
So this is really good news. You guys have the bandwidth to absorb and take some hits right now for clients. That's huge, and I think that really matters, Pankaj. That people know that you guys can, you've built up the scale to be able to take these hits for people. So, you've got a solid chin, for to take the hits for clients, so that they don't have to do that. That's pretty huge. So Larry, we talked about some cool new things today. We talked about IoT, DDoS, really interesting varieties of attack patterns. I know, Larry, you're super interested in the red team and penetration testing part of cybersecurity. That's kind of your goal to get into. Pankaj, is there any simulations that red teamers or pen testers can do to help a company kind of see how their infrastructure could handle one of these attacks? I'm just kind of curious. That's something that just occurred to me to ask.
Well, I think the DDoS solutions are pretty mature from the customer. DDoS protection solutions are pretty mature. And the vendor which you are working with, you should ask the question that how big is their global infrastructure, how much capacity which they have. One more thing I really want our customers to understand the options of deploying DDoS protection. One is always on, and one is the on demand. Okay. And there is an economic cost associated with that.
Okay.
So on demand means that you're not inspecting every packet. When the attack starts, then only you switch on the switch to start the protection. And that saves money for you, but you get hit by a small amount of the DDoS attack in the beginning. And it saves a little bit of latency. But many customers like to have always on DDoS protection all the time. So they want to inspect each and every packet. And if you are doing imagine you are an e-commerce site, you do not want even 5 seconds or 5 minutes your service being disrupted. And that's the reason many of the customers go for always on DDoS protection. So IT has to also understand or evaluate their strategy. Will they like to go for always on or an on-demand DDoS protection?
That makes sense. Okay.
Both solutions are offered. It's a more risk versus cost analysis with each IT.
So if you're an e-commerce website, it's pretty clear you want the always on, right? Now, on demand might be more appropriate for someone who has lower risk if their website went down. I talk to some clients sometimes, like say in the construction industry, if their website's down, if their internet facing presence is down, they're still at the job, shoveling dirt and moving sand, they're okay. Is DDoS, I want to make this clear, is DDoS limited to internet facing properties and assets for organizations? Is there any risk of DDoS affecting us in ways we're not thinking of, like anything that's not internet facing?
Yes, I talked about in the beginning, these DDoS attacks could be a smoke screen for other activities by bad actors, like content stealing your valuable customer data. So if I'm IT, my attention may be on DDoS protection against DDoS while it is happening. While the real motivation of bad actors is to stealing something more valuable than just disrupting your business. So,
that makes sense. I think I read about an attack where the attackers were basically conducting a swift transfer, right, of a banking network. I think it was in Asia and Bank of Taiwan, maybe. They performed both ransomware and DDoS in order to distract IT while they were performing major bank transfers, right? So, like you said, could be a diversion tactic, and that's really interesting as well. Larry, is there anything that any questions you have about DDoS? We have one of the world's leading experts on DDoS here on the show. So anything come to mind?
Yeah, so I was wondering, what is the difference between a buffer overload and a DDoS? I know DDoS mainly is just, it's a lot of packets being sent in at once, and it's just pretty much just floods your.
So buffer overflow could be one of the mechanisms how DDoS attack can be conducted. So if anything will disrupt the service or takes away the resources or stresses the resources, that's what the DDoS attack really wants to achieve. One thing I would like to also say to learner, your audience, is that DDoS attacks are very simple to understand. So if you want to learn into more about DDoS attack, it's not a very complex technology to understand. So as you're learning about DDoS attacks, don't fear about it, read about it, learn about it. It's a very fair, simple concept and very simple technology. But consequences to the business are humongous.
Yeah, and this really gets at the heart of cybersecurity. When you're studying cybersecurity, we have a lot of students listening to this podcast. There's this thing called the CIA Triad, not to be confused with the Central Intelligence Agency, but it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If you're providing an information service and you can't keep that thing available because you're getting attacked, the business really suffers, right? So part of information security's responsibility is to keep the services up and running. And it was really enlightening, Pankaj, for you to tell me today about some of the services. I'll tell you some of the things I didn't know that I learned. I didn't know that you actually had an on-demand service. I assumed that all DDoS protection was always on. So that was actually new to me. I had no idea that you guys actually had 12 terabits of scrubbing capability. That's pretty significant because we learned today that some of the largest attacks, the next largest one is projected to be at 3. You guys can, totally take that hit. And so where would you guide people, businesses that are listening to this? Where would they go to actually learn more about your particular services that we can direct them to?
I will strongly recommend to citrix.com, and you will find a wealth of information about DDoS attack. And if you want more detailed discussion about the DDoS attack and how to mitigate against them, anytime you can reach to the Citrix salesperson and they can help you with more detailed discussion.
Okay.
But I will encourage each one of the listeners to look at their own DDoS protection strategy, and is it capable of the DDoS attacks, the volume, and the strength of DDoS attack currently being seen in the industry.
I have one other question for you. I opened the program letting you know me as a small business owner, the type of solution I went to. Who is your target market? Are you providing DDoS solutions for small business owners, or are you really aiming at more kind of mid-market to enterprise clients?
DDoS protection is like having the lock in your home. It doesn't matter if you have a mansion or you have a one-bedroom, a small apartment. And bad actors go after small businesses, mid-sized businesses, large enterprises, and in last few years, the small and medium businesses have seen more and more DDoS attacks. So if you are a small business, you are equally vulnerable to DDoS attacks. I believe you are more vulnerable because you don't have a big IT infrastructure behind you to support you in case of DDoS. That's the reason that having a cloud-based DDoS protection, which is easier to implement, easier to deploy, and gives you an enterprise-class DDoS protection is more important. So we offer help or our solution to every customer segment.
Awesome.
This is really, really good. I learned a ton, Larry. This was really cool. This was definitely one of our better shows, I think. We just, got to really geek out, go deep. Pankaj, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing with us how you guys help.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much. I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for having me here. And Larry, all the best in your learning and your journey.